Hi everybody, I'm Jake. Today I will be ranking Martin Scorsese's filmography. I wanted to wait till I saw Killers of the Flower Moon. Now that I have, I feel like I can make this list. Every young person who falls in love with movies ends up discovering Scorsese at some point in their lives because he's just such a giant of filmmaking. Interesting filmography. I think a lot of people will just be like, well, gangster flicks. Like, yeah, that's his bread and butter. That's what he does really well and iconic connection to him. But he has a lot of variety in his filmography. And looking back over all the films I've seen of his, there's way more variety and had a lot of mixed feelings about a lot more stuff than I expected. Before I really get into this, I need to make this totally 100% clear. This is just a ranking of his narrative feature films. There are a few I haven't seen, which I just didn't have time to watch all of these before doing this, and I didn't want to cram a bunch of movies that I want to take my time getting to. I haven't seen Who's That Knocking at My Door, Boxcar Bertha, New York, New York, Kundun, and Bringing Out the Dead. With that being said, I'm still ranking 20 or 21 of his films. Let's get to it. This isn't one of those lists where I'm like, oh, they're all great. No, there are some stinkers that I really put on the bottom of the list for a reason. It's all personal taste. Just keep that in mind. I have to put this at the bottom of the list. Gangs of New York. It's a compromised film. I know that because of Miramax and Weinstein. So they had to cut it down, and I know production was hell. I wish there was some like super long cut of this movie, but as it stands, everyone talks about Cameron Diaz being miscast. I think that's true. I think the movie is just, it doesn't have like a real thrust, a narrative thrust. The Butcher stuff is great, obviously, but so much of it just feels like surface level. Like it just feels so unfeeling, like it's missing some heart there because we're just in a rush to get the plot going. There's some great images, great moments in the movie, but it's so dull because it doesn't have that emotional core, I think. It just felt very hollow. And again, I don't think that's Scorsese's fault necessarily. I just think it's just a product of the system it was a part of, and it seems really sad because it seems like the vision that Scorsese had of this film was really interesting. I wish I could have seen that film instead of this. Next up, The Aviator. This is very similar in my mind to Gangs of New York, another one of the Prestige era films in his later career. DiCaprio gives a good performance as Howard Hughes, and I think it has a lot going for it. There's some great sequences. Scorsese dealing with early Hollywood, and that's super interesting. And the Katharine Hepburn stuff is fantastic. And I've seen this a couple of times, and I think maybe there's just something wrong with me why I'm not engaging with it, but it does feel like a movie that's going and then, and then, and then, and then, and then, instead of just like having things build and connect. It just felt kind of like a slideshow of Howard Hughes' life. Ultimately felt like hollow, like we weren't really there. Like it's a lot of noise and bombast, but ultimately empty. And again, I can only imagine that comes down to the script. I just think it doesn't work. Next up, Hugo. I don't really have anything against Hugo. I don't know. It just wasn't very strong for me. I know a lot of people were praising it at the time. I love Scorsese going out of his comfort zone. It's just boring. I don't know. It just wasn't for me. Like, again, a little shallow, surface level, like a lot of style, and it was with like the old cinema stuff, but it felt more of just like a Hollywood exercise. I don't know. I didn't feel the heart in there. Maybe that's a theme of the ones that I don't like as much, that I feel like there's more style over substance. Next up, Mean Streets. I need to watch Mean Streets again. I've only seen it once, but it does feel like early Scorsese, like the trademarks are sort of there. They're like being built. It's very interesting, just like when you're looking at his filmography. But beyond that, I don't find the movie it's not super watchable in my mind. Like I don't remember it being very engaging. I was kind of bored. I feel like De Niro's performance was a little over the top. But again, it's like early period stuff. Like a lot of the trademarks that you see in the rest of his movies, it all starts there, and the themes are there. So in that sense, it's an important movie in his filmography, but it's just not one of my favorites. Next up, Shudder Island. I gotta be honest, I gotta rewatch this. I've only seen it once, and I found it just kind of like, all right. Really stylistically cool, melodramatic, and over the top, and I didn't see much there. It's funny, Scorsese says he regrets making Shudder Island. I think he said that in a recent interview. I don't know why. I'd like to know why. I think it's probably pretty good. I really do, but I need to rewatch it. Next up, we have The Last Temptation of Christ. I think it's a good movie. Like, at this point in the list of films, like, none of these I think are bad. You know, they have imperfections, but most of them hold up really well. And I think The Last Temptation of Christ is one of them. It's just not a subject I'm super interested in. The themes don't engage me as much as they do Scorsese. I know it's a very personal film. Some of the acting and casting choices are interesting. Trying to get that kind of verisimilitude, is that the word? Trying to get the kind of realism and naturalism into the film. It's weird because I feel like it maybe needed to go more stylistically over the top if we're going to be keeping all of these American actors. I mean, Harvey Keitel, I feel like if we're going to go over the top and big, like we should go big, or try to keep it very like realistic and honed down and no big name actors. Interesting film, and it's a good movie. It's just not something that I'm like, I really ever feel the need to watch. Next up, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. This is a great early Scorsese film. I think people forget that this was like a huge deal. Like it made a lot of money. Ellen Burstyn got a lot of acclaim. I don't know if it made a lot of money, but I know it was sort of like a hit and a critical hit and kind of announced Scorsese. I think this was before Taxi Driver. This was a big deal. I think people don't talk about it nearly as much as they should. Very interesting, especially because of Scorsese's look on this female protagonist, set in Arizona, which I love. Chris Christopherson is great in it. Ellen Burstyn, as I said, she's just amazing. A really good movie, just great movie. It doesn't feel very Scorsese-ish, but I think that's what's great about it, is that he's doing something a little different and it's early period. So there's a lot to be gained from watching this movie. I don't think people should. I think people should definitely watch it. Next up, and you guys might hate me for putting this so low, is The Wolf of Wall Street. I enjoyed The Wolf of Wall Street a lot when it came out. I'm not trying to be like, it's a bad movie. It's a great movie. It's very good, but it just didn't feel like it was doing enough in my mind for the subject it was talking about. I feel like just the general approach of the movie could have been more interesting or have more depth. It just felt, when I think about it, it just feels like a very surface level, fun movie about bad people doing bad things. And that's Scorsese's good at that, you know. I feel like it doesn't have the depth of like Goodfellas or Casino. It doesn't reach in the same way. Maybe that's the point, you know. Maybe it's the point is that it's trying to look like a commercial and be glossy and fun. And there are some darker moments in it, but overall, changes my perception of the movie is seeing all of the stupid guys who like idolize this kind of iconography and the imagery in this movie and the kind of mindset, the hustle grind culture, you know, like, and the fact that Jordan Belfort has made so much money as a result of this movie and the books and the speaking engagements and everything. It just makes me kind of sick to my stomach that I'm like, I don't think the movie is pro Jordan Belfort, but I think that overall, a lot of people watching this movie aren't really getting the intent of the movie necessarily. And I'm not saying the movie has to be like blunt or anything and make a very bold, didactic statement, but it just changes my perception of it. I can't enjoy it as much as others maybe. I think it's a fantastic movie and I get the love for it, but personally, just in my ranking, I just don't feel like putting it that high. Next up, and I watched this super recently for this list, is The Color of Money. Wow, this was such a surprise. I haven't seen The Hustler, which I think is important to note, but I don't think you necessarily have to see it. Paul Newman, Tom Cruise, obviously beautifully shot. I mean, the pool sequences is just like dance and ballet and just the choreography of it. It's amazing watching Scorsese pull off what is basically like a studio product, while maybe the themes aren't as deep as his other movies. It's not as personal as his other movies maybe, but I feel like the style and the filmmaking aspects of it just elevate it to such a degree that it like doesn't even matter. Like it is this kind of like mythic story of one person starting out in their career and one person at their end. You know, it's a universal story in that way, but and maybe because I just saw this so recently that I'm it's so great, so wonderful. But it really is like, I just think it's underrated. I personally, it might even rise up in my rankings, but I really loved The Color of Money. Next up, Cape Fear. I like Cape Fear a lot. I'm a huge fan of John D. MacDonald, as some of you know, and he wrote the original book for Cape Fear. It was originally called The Executioners. It came out in the 1950s, and it was turned into the 1962 film, I think, called Cape Fear with Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum. That's a great movie. It's better than the book. Like, I love John D. MacDonald, I'm sorry, but the book is nowhere near as good as these movies. The movies bring the pulp element out. It's less didactic. It's just about this visceral monster. It's such a good, just like boogeyman in a middle class setting. I think Scorsese like does something really twisted. Like he really turns the knife after stabbing you with this movie and makes it gross, thrilling, and pulpy, and over the top and bombastic. And that Bernard Herrmann score, so good, but it's also sick and revolting. It's great. Like, it's just so good. And I think De Niro does go over the top in a really good way. And there's a couple scenes that are so memorable. I don't know. I really like it. I just like seeing Scorsese go sleazy, you know. Next up, we have After Hours. I think After Hours, it was underrated for a while, and now I think it's getting the acclaim that it deserves. People are kind of tuning into Scorsese in the 80s. Oh my God, I skipped the King of Comedy. I'm so sorry. Between The Wolf of Wall Street and The Color of Money, I have The King of Comedy. So right there in the middle. I mean, it's hard to place it anywhere. Before I talk about After Hours, I guess I'll talk about After Hours and The King of Comedy together because in that kind of similar period. But The King of Comedy, super dark, again, about the comedian. I just can't watch it again. Like, that's the problem. Like, it was a good movie and I really enjoyed it. I find Jerry Lewis really unpleasant, which he's supposed to be, but just in real life, like, he was a horrible prick. Like, he was just a huge dickhead, and I don't like watching him, really. And then De Niro was giving the most cringeworthy performance ever. Like, it's such an unpleasant movie to watch. It's brilliant, and it's amazing. I love The King of Comedy, but I just can't force myself to watch it again. like, it's a good movie, but God, I just don't make me watch that movie again. It is so painful. And then, yeah, After Hours, the style is amazing. And it is like that kind of mythic odyssey of, you know, New York City. And I don't know much about New York. I never lived in New York, but you get the feel. So funny because there's so much trivial stuff and everything just keeps going bad and worse and worse. And I love that kind of story, very Kafkaesque, as they say. For someone who experiences a lot of anxiety and is constantly worrying about the little things going wrong and double checking everything, this movie is kind of like just like soaking in your anxieties, but kind of getting a laugh out of it. Yeah, I mean, the only reason it's not higher, I guess, is because like it isn't as like personal to Scorsese as some other movies. It's not one of his iconic type of films, but it is brilliant. It's amazing. Do enjoy watching it. Definitely enjoy watching it more than I enjoy watching The King of Comedy. The top 9, I believe. So next up, After Hours is Casino. Everyone compares Casino to Goodfellas, and I don't think that's totally fair. Casino is its own monster. You know, it's dealing with sort of similar themes, but it feels much. What's the word? It feels way more cynical and sad. This like really toxic relationship is at the heart of it. So much of the movie feels like a documentary, especially that first hour is just brilliant, diving into this is how the world of casinos work. Kind of all over the place and sprawling, but I think it's definitely one of my favorite Scorsese rewatches because I feel like there's so much in there and a lot of fun stuff. So yeah, even though it's not higher on the list, it's definitely one that I've probably seen more than most. You know, I've seen it quite a few times, and it's one that I always like to rewatch. So then next up, I saw this yesterday because I had not seen it. I'd been putting it off for a while. I don't know why, but I knew you guys would be mad if I hadn't watched it. Of course, it's a stone cold masterpiece, The Irishman. This late Scorsese style where he's just pumping out masterpieces. They're big, they're long, but man, they're deeper, I think, than a lot of his movies, and they're so like pensive and full of grief and reflection and ambiguity. That's so interesting, and they're slower and they feel more stately, and the style is pared back, and I just love that. I love that. I also love that it's subverting people's expectations. I mean, people were like, "Oh, we're doing The Irishman. We're doing Goodfellas Part 2. Let's do it. Let's have fun. We're de-aging these guys." And the effect of the de-aging, first off, like it works most of the time, but like with the body movements, it's awkward and weird. But I think the movie is like awkward. It's like an old man's movie. Like it really is like senior home movie. Like there's so much time spent in the senior home. There's so much time spent with aging, with regrets. I mean, I'm still sitting with it, of course. Like I can't say all that I feel about it now because I'm still processing it, but it just left me with this overwhelming sense of like sadness about the passing of time and about family and what it means to like what that culture was of crime and greed and this. I feel like it's so effective at making its point, even more so than like his other brilliant movies about gangsters. It takes away so much of the glamour. You don't see all of the fun partying. You don't see much of the like, oh, this guy's so cool and everyone respects him. You see some of that, but it's so pared back that it's just like you're following this character who has such little agency. He's just like this dull person who's just following orders and getting rewarded for killing people. And it's slow, and at the end of the day, it's about living with yourself. It's brilliant. Speaking of late period Scorsese, next on the list is Silence. Silence doesn't get enough attention, honestly. Like Silence was, my God, it's It's harrowing. It's really interesting, the kind of questions that it's raising about faith. And although I'm not Catholic or religious, really, it spoke to me in a sense of just that kind of like constant search and wondering about if there's more out there and what is the purpose of life and suffering, yada, 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 you know, all these deep themes, but it's done so skillfully and in such a way that's very different for him. And I remember watching this going like, it didn't feel like most Scorsese films. It felt like really scary and brutal and just an unpleasant, kind of relentless movie. Really affected me in a different way. I mean, that ending is amazing, and I want to see it again because I feel like it has a lot of secrets. I mean, it sticks with me. It stuck with me. It continues to stick with me. So next up, The Age of Innocence. Maybe I need to rewatch this again. I feel like I'm putting it a little high on the list, but I just really remember loving it. Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, tackling like this great literary source material and doing it with such style. And it reminds me a lot of another movie I love, which is The Great Gatsby, which is self-consciously adapting literature in a way that's not trying to, it's like acknowledging that it is literature with the narrative, the voiceover, the styles, feels like a book in a way, or trying to capture the feeling of reading a book. There's so much feeling that you don't see in a lot of Scorsese movies. I think that's why I love this movie so much, that there's so much like muted feeling in this movie, is capturing the feelings within with the camera and just making it more physical and real. All these small, intense, difficult feelings and making it so vivid and alive, you know? So I just love The Age of Innocence. Next up on the list is Goodfellas. A lot of people think Goodfellas is, you know, his masterpiece. Is certainly one of them. I mean, he's made so many amazing films. I mean, I don't even know what to say about Goodfellas. Everyone should see it. It's a perfect movie, and the way it captures the gangster world and creating these characters is just funny. It has so many great moments, and I do feel like great double feature, if you want to be, you know, spending your entire day watching movies, would be Goodfellas and then The Irishman. They are of a pair, really, you know, and about a person entering this world. You see more of what it's really like, I think, in The Irishman and the kind of tragedy. The character, Ray Liotta's character, is different, and it is a different world, but unbelievably entertaining, just relentlessly fun and interesting, and yeah, just amazing. Goodfellas. All right, now we're into the top three territory. This may be recency bias, but I honestly don't think so. I think it's one of his best movies. Killers of the Flower Moon. I did a review on it recently talking about my feelings. My thoughts haven't really changed. I think it even makes what The Irishman is saying in like a stronger point, but in a different world and tackling different, you know, more about the relationship between DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone's character, like Scorsese dealing with these themes that he's always dealt with, but in a different way and in a really mournful way. And it is, I think what's so great about it is because it is so entertaining. It's interesting. It doesn't lose your focus, but it is difficult. It's hard to watch. It's painful and supposed to hurt and feel gross. I lean more towards those types of movies. You know, I think there are people who are more into like the Scorsese doing more like the fun, like capturing the feeling in the moment of this type of world and environment and the kind of euphoria, Wolf of Wall Street and Goodfellas and Casino. And then there's the people who maybe prefer the more like brutal, ugly, disgusting, like push your nose into the violence and feel shame. You know, maybe people who have more shame. Killers of the Flower Moon is just a masterpiece. I don't want to say anymore. You can watch my review. Number two, number one, you guys can probably guess. Number two, I have Taxi Driver. Oh, these two are basically interchangeable. Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. Taxi Driver I have number two because I think Raging Bull is like it's just like amazing. Taxi Driver is also amazing, but I think Raging Bull is just a little more mature. It's a little more assured in what it's doing, and I think it takes more risks and I think it's interesting how the story of Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker, they were looking at like the dailies or the rough cut of Raging Bull, and they were going, who made this? You know, because it does feel like an alien made it almost and is capturing this world from like this kind of pulled back, reserved, but also very in your face, like a visceral way. In your face, but it's also like looking from 1,000 yards away. Really beautiful, and how it can make this like beautiful poetry out of this disgusting character and people. You can feel the tragedy. It's just grand like tragedy. It's like fucking Shakespeare. It's amazing. Stylistically incredible. It's emotionally so deep, and I love Raging Bull. Then Taxi Driver is my number two. I mean, it's Taxi Driver. I don't know. It's also like really captured my imagination when I was like in high school, and these movies when I saw, you know, in high school, like they leave such an impression. And you know, Travis Bickle now, I know Scorsese was saying, you know, everyone's Travis Bickle these days, and I think like that's why it speaks to like the alienation, the isolation. It lingers, and it holds true to a lot of how people are today, you know, with stuck inside the internet, everyone's atomized, and loss of communities and identity, and there's so much there that is still so relevant and beautiful and heartbreaking. And Taxi Driver, what else can you say? I mean, he's made so many amazing movies, and this list is subject to change, especially like the top 15. It's hard to go through all these movies and talk about, you know, Scorsese, because there's so much brilliance. Like, I don't even know how to articulate myself and talk about these amazing films. Anyways, I'm curious about what you all think. What are some of your favorite Scorsese movies? Am I right about The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon? Am I overrating them? Which ones am I underrating? I'm sure some of you aren't going to be happy how low I put Wolf of Wall Street, but that's my ranking. Let me know what other directors you want me to do or discuss. Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I will talk to you all later. We're going to see Napoleon soon. All right, bye-bye.